I have been reliably informed that this region here is where the first vines in France were ever planted. I'm also reliably informed that, collectively, this region creates the biggest vineyard in the world. So there's a lot of drinking to do. Cheers. If you've managed to keep up with the tasting so far, you should have standing by a Viognier and a Minefoy. We'll also be discussing the fascinating history of this area and talking about the future of wine. And our Master of Wine will give you some tips on how to get real value for money. I'm in an area which runs from the foot of the Pyrenees along the Mediterranean coast to the Rhone Valley. There are hills, beaches, salt lakes, beautiful old abbeys and castles. There are wonderful people, delicious food, and mile upon mile of vines. This is the Languedoc, the home of the wines you'll be tasting, and one of the world's largest vineyards. 750,000 acres of liquid heaven. So there's one thing for sure. Here in the Languedoc, you will not die of thirst, eh?
That's right. Now, gastronomic one, knowing what a sort of trendy type you are...
I'm not trendy.
I thought we'd taste a wine made from perhaps the trendiest grape of all at the moment, a grape called the Viognier.
If you have a bottle at home, open it now.
For donkey's years, the Viognier grape has grown up in the northern Rhone Valley, where it makes some very posh wines. I think you mentioned them when we were in the Rhone, things like Condrieu.
Chateau Gruyère.
Chateau Gruyère, that's right. And it was always viewed as a very, very difficult grape to grow. 30, 40 years ago, it wasn't really seen around very much. And then the fame of the Condrieu has spread. The grape variety has been planted now down here in the south of France, Australia, California. So for the people who want to have the trendiest grape at the moment, Viognier is actually where it's at, even more than Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc.
Splendid. Is it expensive?
Well, the traditional versions, the Condrieu and the Chateau Gruyère, are desperately, catastrophically expensive. But down here, reasonable price, you know, probably about £5 or something. The things to look out for then, Viognier gives you a reasonably full colour for a white wine. You can see, what are we going to say, straw, perhaps a touch of gold in that.
Yes, indeed.
In that colour there.
And then finding that at home? Yeah, I agree, yeah.
As ever, of course, it's on the nose where the real excitement comes through. And
I'm getting so much better at doing this.
I should hope so.
One programme to go and I've learned to do a twizzle.
It has a lovely sort of perfumed character.
Yes, it is good. It's got a lovely, crisp, appley smell to it.
Yep, it's got that delicious.
What do you think at home? Do you think I think it has. Do you agree?
Maybe a bit of apricot or peach, something like that. And then something that's all quite difficult to describe, but almost like a sort of an oily, rich character on the smell. On the smell.
The taste is more important, isn't it?
It's got...
All this smelling and sniffing and swirling.
What we're smelling there is actually the pure fruit character.
I think it's brilliant.
I love the Viognier wines. And then on the taste, dry, moderate acidity. It's not viciously acid, just mid-acidity there. Moderate alcohol.
Sorry.
This is obviously not an awesome wine, but it's got a mid-weight, lovely freshness, and quite a good length of flavour there. It actually stays in the mouth very well.
To be perfectly honest, I don't know what you think at home, but if you weren't too lucky with your choice of Chablis, if you'd bought a rather bad Chablis, I'd say this leaves the Chablis standing.
I think, yeah, I mean, if it was a poor example of Chablis, it's beautiful fresh. And yet, this is, after all, just a Van der Pey wine, you know. What the authorities down here realised was that there was only a finite market for the Van der Table, that people were moving up market. And so very cleverly, they came up with this idea of an upmarket table wine, which is where the idea of a Van der Pey came in. Not as exalted as an Appellation Contrôlée, but I think, as we can taste from this, a big step up from the old-fashioned Van der Table.
Certainly, and I would say, JP, I'm pleased to award you the Floyd Wine of the Week award. This is excellent, it's well chilled, and can I have some more, please? It was unthinkable 10 years ago that the Languedoc could produce good wine. But times have changed, and now the region can grow grapes such as Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, and of course Viognier, because it has no Appellation Contrôlée restriction. Why? Well, to find out, we must look back to the past. In former times, these grand chateaux produced vast quantities of really quite undrinkable plonk. The only people who really drank it were the labourers, 2 or 3 litres a day. But as consumer demands changed, there was no market for such poor wine, and the Languedoc was then largely responsible for fueling the famous wine lakes of Europe. In fact, the French government was actually paying growers to rip up their vines, and the area was virtually written off. Although, in fact, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the region. The soil's perfect and the climate is excellent. And the growers have been persuaded to grow less grapes with a resultant increase in quality. That was the start, better grapes to work with. Then the producers had to ditch generations of old-style methods and wake up to new technology. And they turned not to the fancy winemakers of Bordeaux, nor in fact to any other region in France, but they looked to the New World, to the most up-to-date and efficient winemaking methods available. And the results speak for themselves. And in fact, I've tasted all of them, and they're jolly good. It's been a remarkable revolution here. Years ago, the Languedoc was famous for its rotten wines, really, the Vin de Table. They weren't very good at all. But now, they're making these excellent varietal grape wines, like the Chardonnays, the Merlots, the Cabernet Sauvignons, and stuff like that. And what's good about it is, you know what you're getting. If you like a Merlot, if you like a Cabernet Sauvignon, you know it's going to be the same each time. They're good value, they're good drinking. In fact, I'm going to have one now myself. And in this very hot weather, you know, it's well worth sticking the reds into ice to chill them down a bit. They taste really good. It's a lovely story altogether. They've made a virtue out of what was once a complete catastrophe. Now, here is this wonderful medieval town called Carcassonne. Apart from being famous for its antiquities and stuff like that, it was founded in the 6th century initially, and then rebuilt in the 13th century. It's remained preserved ever since by a magic wand, I would imagine. They've also got quite a good rugby team as well. But one of their classic dishes here is a thing called a cassoulet. It's basically baked beans with meat. Now, the meat could be, and often is, preserved goose or preserved duck, pork, sausages. They also make it with mutton, they make it with partridge, they put anything into it. It's one of those dishes that dates from pre-potato times, when beans were the staple diet down here on the Mediterranean area of France and indeed Spain. Now, in here, in goose fat, I've got some bits of smoked belly of pork frying away. The next thing I'm going to add into that is going to be some finely chopped onions and stir those in. I'm going to add some crushed local purple-skinned garlic, which is very strong, lovely sunshine garlic this is. Pop those in there. And then a load of tomatoes. Now let all that lot sweat down just for a few moments in the goose fat. Right, now the haricot beans I've soaked in water overnight so they've swollen up and they're ready to cook. They also now go onto this bed of pork, garlic, onions and tomato. Then we add some bay leaves, some thyme, lovely sun-dried stuff, and a sprig of rosemary as well. Blend that in. We'll add a bottle of the Languedoc white wine, Sauvignon. Why not? It's absolutely excellent. Now, in fact, that's absolutely perfect. This needs to cook for about an hour and a half. You might like to cook it in your oven. I don't have an oven to cook it in. And from time to time, you might need to add a little more liquid to it. And that cooks for about 1.5 hours or something like that. Now, over here, I've got my lovely sausages. Toulouse sausages, they're invariably called. Some have got garlic in, some have got a little bit of paprika in. Doesn't really matter what kind of sausages you use, as long as they're pure pork. I know you're going. Don't worry. I'll just carry on cooking. The sausages are partly cooked, so now they can go into the main dish, which is the beans, the tomato, onions, garlic, and all this lovely fat also goes in. Ouch. Chuck that on the floor. One of the most important things is that this is preserved duck. It's cooked duck, which has been packaged in its own fat, and you buy it from the supermarket or the delicatessen. That is the next thing that goes into this dish. Now, all of that just cooks away gently for only about another 20 minutes because the beans have been cooking in their sauce for about an hour and a half. These things were already either cooked or partly cooked. Lid goes back on, and that just stays there for about 20 minutes to warm through the cooked meats. Now, here in the Languedoc, they have a salad called an anchoyade, and it could be potatoes, tomatoes, eggs, and anchovy. It could be all sorts of different things, but it's basically vegetables and anchovies. Here's my version. First of all, a pile of salad leaves in the middle of the whole thing. Then around it, some raw carrots, some strips of red peppers, some lovely spring or summer onions, some sticks of cucumber, some spicy hot little radishes, some tomatoes, some hard-boiled eggs all around. Into the middle of the lettuce, some chopped up boiled potato. On top of that, fillets of anchovy, which has just been marinated in olive oil and lemon juice. Then a jolly good dollop of garlic mayonnaise as well. And this is anchovy fillets in olive oil, garlic and capers and lemon juice, whisked up in a little blender. And you pour this over the whole lot. And that really is la cuisine du soleil, the cooking of the sun. This is what you get down here. Right, so we're beginning to get together now a Languedocian feast, the main bit of which is, of course, the imperial works Cassoulet, which should now be in jolly good shape. So hold on. Have that over there. And we'll start ladling some of this out. Sausages, preserved goose or duck, beans, the sun-dried herbs of Languedoc, which are known as herbes de Provence, because gastronomically speaking, we are indeed still in Provence. And that is a cassoulet. I think it's really rather good.
As well as a great variety of wines, this sunny region of France has a great variety of everything. If it's beaches you're after, well, there are nearly as many acres of sand as there are of vines, and it's a great place for seafood lovers. One of the great specialities is an assiette de fruits de mer, a wonderful selection of shellfish and mollusks. And just up from the coast there are some lovely towns. One of my favourites is Béziers. It's in the heart of Languedoc and not really a tourist town. Every road there seems to lead you to the massive 14th century cathedral Saint-Nazaire with its fine sculpture, stained glass and frescoes. It's a great place to watch the world go by.
Oh, and by the way, Béziers is twinned with Stockport. And why not? The architecture's similar and the climate is almost identical.
Oh, well, it's time to move on.
One of the indispensable tools, utensils or gadgets in the kitchen is, of course, the corkscrew. Now, we know that the French make the best wine. Apparently, the Italians make the best corkscrews, but they also make the biggest pepper mills too, don't they? Anyway, it's my job today to test a few of the many which are on the market. So I'll start with this one, which I would think you'd need a degree in engineering to get to grips with. I won't even try to use that one because it's a sort of corkscrew I associate with people who also put their bottles of wine in little silver wire baskets and things like that. So I'm not even going to try, it's too complicated. So I've chosen this one because it's the only one that can open the top of the bottle and pulls the cork out. Okay, it's not expensive, it's not a flash Christmas present, but it actually works and it fits neatly in your pocket. It's brilliant.
Okay, I've chosen what I think is the best corkscrew, so get yours ready now for the next tasting. We're off to Minerve, a town which rises dramatically from a gorge in the wild Minervois hills. It's a part of the Languedoc that's really worth a visit.
Now listen, Minervois, Fitou, Corbière, to mention just 3 appellation contrôlé wines from the Languedoc,
have survived against this amazing revolution of single varietal wines, which the Languedoc is now, I think, justifiably proud. Why have they survived, and anyway, do they deserve it?
Well, I think, as you can see, we're up here in the hills, and they've always done quite well growing the black grapes up here, and this has been recognised in giving these wines, you know, Appellation Contrôlée. So we've got an interesting dichotomy at the moment in Languedoc between the traditional red wines of the hill country, and then down on the plain, as we've seen, you know, where it was always Van de Table, we've got the revolution with the Van de Pey. So it's an interesting contrast, you know. So, but as I say, these reds up here, we're not, hopefully, as we're going to see, look at the world's most profound wines, but, you know, for good, honest country wines, rather like we had last week in, you know, Provence, we should have something quite interesting. There we go.
Oh, it's very dark.
Yes, I mean, still being down here in the south, we've got the same sort of lineup of grapes that we've had ever since we got into the Rhone Valley. So things like the Grenache, the Syrah, and Carignan, which has always been the traditional local black grape. And as you say, you get a nice dark colour, quite a youthful wine, quite pink on the rim. And now I think the smell is something you actually probably quite like, because we've had that lovely soft, ripe, almost sort of jammy, spicy, peppery fruit.
It's peppery. I like this stuff.
Which I find delicious. I mean, I don't know, or do you... It's more rustic than...
I think I'm going to like this.
And then on the taste... Again, this lovely southern character. It's dry, low in acidity, reasonable amount of alcohol, not too tannic. I always think one thing I always get on Minervois, though, is that slightly dry, savoury chewiness right on the finish. That
it's quite chalky, too, I find. Do you think it's a bit chalky? I think it's a bit chalky. Do you know, I have to say that some of the smaller wines, some of the Côte d'Rhône Village, on reflection now, having tried many more of the French varietal wines, I wasn't actually overly impressed. When we got to Lubron and when we got here to the Languedoc, I found that these cheaper wines, even less fashionable they might be, but they really appeal to me.
No, they're good, honest wines here. I've always been very fond of them as well, and I'm delighted that Languedoc has come so far in such a short time.
So, what is the future then? I mean, do we live to see the day, heaven forbid, where even through some kind of mechanical smelling process, the masters of wines of this world would be spirited away to a great wine cellar in the sky? I mean, is that what's on the cards?
I think you're obviously a visionary, Alfred, because there is some very interesting research where they've got a system which can actually do a sort of nose-like chemical analysis of the wine.
Surely what matters is, do we enjoy what is in the glass?
Well, this is where the bad news is. The dreaded master of wine may have a few more years to go, because, as you say, it's ultimately wine is something that you and I have to enjoy.
I'll drink to that, JP. And, in fact, to Minervois. I hope it survives. Well, that may not have been one of the most expensive wines in this series, but surprisingly, it was one of my personal favourites. Clearly, the sun's getting to me. Anyway, we've tasted a vast array of different wines on this trip, from Grand Crus to country wines, at very different prices. But you pay your money and you take your choice. I've said it before, but I'm going to say it again. I think it's always worth spending, if you can afford it, a little extra on your wine. But if you have a budget, it's worth knowing what sort of value for money you are getting. And JP, you can explain all that to us, can't you?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, whether you're going easy on price or whether you want to push the boat out, it's useful, as you say, to have a few indicators. And I've brought along some examples to show, as you say, what your extra bit of money buys you. The first trio I've got over here are 3 Chablis from a firm called Moreau. And what I wanted to show here was that in Burgundy, if you remember, they have this very strict system where each vineyard, in effect, has a rating. The first bottle we've got here just literally says Chablis on the label, and that will be, if you like, from a regular grade vineyard. Next to it is what's labelled as Chablis Premier Cru, and that will be a wine from one of the vineyards on the slopes, arguably a better wine. And then finally, the third bottle from Chablis is a Chablis Grand Cru. And of course, these are the very, very special sites, very expensive because they have the best exposure and everything. So in Burgundy, essentially, as you go from village to Premier Cru to Grand Cru, it's a better vineyard, it's a more expensive wine.
So what are the differences in price between the 3, approximately?
Yeah, I mean,
I know we've got people watching in dollars, in francs, in zen and yen and goodness knows what. We're going to put them into quids, into pounds.
Yes, that's right. I mean, roughly speaking, we're looking at something like £7 for the regular Chablis, £10 for a Premier Cru, and then it's the Grand Crus, because they're a bit special, you jump up to 16, 17, 18, something like that.
Nothing more expensive?
Oh, I mean, you can, I'm sure.
I mean, what can you have for 25 quid?
For 25 quid. Well, then, I suppose that comes down to this pair here. Something I've been rattling about a lot is the difference between, if you like, a normal wine made from youngish vines, a Burgundy from this firm called Rodet here, and the same company, again making a Burgundy, but this time from their oldest vines. If you see the words vieille vigne on a label, it's often a good pointer. The grower is, in effect, boasting or telling you that it's made from his old vines, and therefore should be a more concentrated wine. The one rub with this, unfortunately, is not many producers actually put vieille vigne on the label. So I'm afraid it's a sort of anorak level of information. You've either got to ask the producer or go into a wine shop and quiz them and ask them, you know, which of their wines are made from old vines. But it's worth probing, that one, I think.
Now, I happen to know these two wines terribly well, Côte de Ventoux and Côte Rôtie. They both look very similar, but I know, because I've been drinking them for years and years, that the Côte de Ventoux is a good, friendly country wine, and the outrageously, I'm happy to say, expensive Côte Rôtie, burnt slopes. But how can we tell, just by looking at the bottles there, that one is good and one is not so good?
I'm afraid it is, as you say, it comes down to, I'm afraid, some hard drinking and some background knowledge. There are just cases where, you know, a Côte de Ventoux is a good, honest country wine. It's a bit like the Luberon we had a few weeks ago. Côte Rôtie is a bit like the Great Slope at Hermitage we did our tasting on. Spectacular vineyard, arguably making one of the world's great wines. I suppose the analogy one can think of is house prices, that, you know, you want to buy a house in Kensington, it's going to cost you a few bob. Buy a house in Billericay or something.
Oh, you got Billericay. Hey, if you want to know his fax number, telephone number, and his address, if you live in Billericay, write to him. Ring him up, and preferably after midnight, because he's got a young baby. And it'd be even more irritating, because he doesn't get any sleep anyway.
What an informative and interesting day that was. But as you may have noticed, JP didn't offer me a slurp during that sequence, so I'm off to visit an old chum of mine who happens to be a winemaker and have one with him. Until not so long ago, Pierre de Groot was a vet. He still maintains a great interest in animals, but when this wine revolution began in Languedoc, Pierre decided to get in on the act. He makes a full range of varietal wines, all named after his daughter Virginie.
Away from the big-time winemaking business, where Pierre exports millions of bottles of wine, much of it to England, the big supermarket chains there, he likes to relax on his modest little homestead. But like all good eggs, he keeps a drop of his very special stuff in the garage. Ah, now that's what I call homebrew. Now, it looks as though I might be here for quite a long time, so before you go, don't forget that next week is our last programme and we're going to Champagne. So pop out at once, buy a magnum if you can, or a half if you can't, of Brut Champagne. Cheers. Cheers.